Salt Lake City sits nestled between towering mountain ranges and the shores of a vast inland sea. But beneath the modern skyline and bustling streets lies a story that defies belief. Tonight, we'll uncover how a barren desert valley transformed into what believers called Zion, a promised land carved from seemingly impossible terrain. This is a tale of extraordinary vision, back-breaking determination, and the relentless pursuit of religious freedom. We'll discover how a small band of pioneers turned alkali flats into fertile fields, how they diverted rivers and moved mountains, quite literally, to build their sacred city. Salt Lake City survived harsh winters that claimed lives, conflicts that threatened its very existence, and challenges that would have broken lesser communities. We'll start with a surprising discovery in the heart of the valley, and from there, we'll trace the incredible journey of transformation that created one of America's most unique cities. So just relax and let your mind drift as we explore the remarkable history of Salt Lake City. When you think of Salt Lake City today, perhaps you picture the gleaming spires of the temple, the geometric precision of its streets, or the dramatic backdrop of snow-capped peaks. This city feels like it was always meant to be here, perfectly positioned between lake and mountains. But step back in time, and you'll find something extraordinary. The valley that now hosts nearly 1.2 million people was once considered uninhabitable wasteland, a place where even experienced mountain men warned against settlement. Yet it became the foundation for one of the most ambitious colonization efforts in American history. The area now known as Salt Lake City has been significant for far longer than most people realize, and it holds secrets that reveal just how dramatically landscapes can be transformed by human determination. In recent decades, archaeological work throughout the Salt Lake Valley has uncovered evidence of remarkable diversity. Ancient tools, pottery fragments, and dwelling sites paint a picture of thriving communities that existed here for thousands of years. These discoveries show us that long before any Europeans set foot in the valley, this was a place where people not only survived, but flourished. However, to understand the true transformation of Salt Lake City, we must begin with the valley's earliest known inhabitants. Indigenous peoples first arrived in the Great Basin region approximately 12,000 years ago, following the retreat of massive glacial lakes that once covered much of the area. These early inhabitants were remarkably adaptable. They developed sophisticated knowledge of seasonal patterns, understanding exactly when and where to find food, water, and materials for shelter. The valley provided abundant resources for those who knew how to access them. Grass seeds, pine nuts, roots, and wild game sustained communities throughout the changing seasons. By the time of European contact, several distinct groups called the valley home. The Shoshone people inhabited much of the northern portion, while Ute bands controlled southern areas. The Goshute people lived in the western desert regions. These were not nomadic wanderers, as early settlers often described them, but rather sophisticated societies with complex territorial agreements and seasonal migration patterns. The Shoshone established winter camps in protected canyon areas and summer settlements near freshwater streams. They developed ingenious methods for harvesting the valley's resources, including elaborate fish traps and communal rabbit drives that could feed entire communities. Their intimate knowledge of the landscape would prove invaluable to later settlers, though this contribution is often overlooked in traditional histories. The valley itself presented both opportunities and challenges. The Jordan River meandered through fertile bottomland, creating marshes and meadows that supported diverse wildlife. Elk, deer, and antelope grazed in mountain meadows, while the lake and its tributaries teemed with fish. Yet the climate was harsh, with bitter winters and scorching summers that demanded careful planning and resource management. The first European to lay eyes on the Salt Lake Valley was likely Silvestre Vélez de Escalante, a Spanish missionary who passed through the region in 1776 while searching for a route between Spanish settlements in New Mexico and California. His expedition noted the vast lake and surrounding mountains, but they were focused on their mission and did not linger to explore. For decades afterward, the valley remained largely unknown to the outside world. Spanish influence in the region was minimal, focused primarily on trade relationships with native peoples rather than settlement or exploration. The valley's isolation protected it from the diseases and conflicts that devastated other indigenous communities during the colonial period. This isolation began to change in the 1820s as American mountain men ventured into the region seeking beaver pelts. Jim Bridger is often credited as the first non-native person to see the Great Salt Lake, though this claim is disputed. What's certain is that these hardy trappers and traders began mapping the region and spreading word of its unique characteristics. The mountain men described a landscape unlike anything else in North America. They spoke of a massive inland sea so salty that nothing could live in its waters, surrounded by mountains that soared to incredible heights. Some claimed the lake was connected to the Pacific Ocean through underground channels. These tales, mixing fact with fiction, began to capture the imagination of the outside world. By the 1840s, the valley was becoming better known through the accounts of government expeditions. John C. Fremont's surveys provided detailed maps and scientific observations that would prove crucial for future settlement. His reports described the valley's potential for agriculture, while also noting the challenges posed by its arid climate and alkaline soil. But it was Fremont's description of the valley's strategic location that would prove most significant. Nestled between mountain passes that controlled access to California and Oregon, the Salt Lake Valley occupied a position of enormous importance for westward expansion. This geographic advantage would soon attract the attention of a remarkable group of religious pioneers. The story of Salt Lake City's transformation truly begins not in Utah, but in upstate New York, where a religious movement was taking shape that would forever change the American West. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, founded by Joseph Smith Jr. in 1830, faced persecution wherever its members tried to establish communities. From New York, the growing community moved to Ohio, then Missouri, then Illinois, always seeking a place where they could practice their faith without interference. Each move brought new challenges and often violent opposition from neighbors who viewed their beliefs and practices with suspicion and hostility. The murder of Joseph Smith in 1844 marked a turning point for the community. Under the leadership of Brigham Young, church members began to envision something unprecedented, a complete exodus to a place so remote that they could build their ideal society without outside interference. Young studied every available map and report about the American West. He corresponded with government officials, interviewed mountain men, and gathered intelligence about potential settlement locations. The Salt Lake Valley emerged as the most promising option despite its reputation as a forbidding desert wasteland. The decision to relocate an entire religious community to an unmapped wilderness was audacious beyond measure. Young was planning to move thousands of people across the continent to a place where no permanent settlement had ever succeeded. Critics called it madness, but Young saw divine providence in the valley's isolation and challenges. The first pioneer company left Winter Quarters, Nebraska, in April 1847. This advanced group of 143 men, 3 women, and 2 children faced a journey of over 1,300 miles across uncharted territory. They carried minimal supplies, relying on their faith and determination to see them through. The journey took nearly 4 months and tested every member of the company. They faced river crossings that claimed wagons and supplies, mountain passes that seemed impossible to navigate, and constant uncertainty about what lay ahead. Disease struck the company, and several members died along the trail. But on July 24th, 1847, the advance company crested the final mountain pass and gazed down into the Salt Lake Valley for the first time. What they saw was both inspiring and daunting. The valley stretched before them, vast and seemingly empty, bounded by magnificent mountains and dominated by the strange inland sea. Brigham Young, weakened by mountain fever, reportedly declared, "This is the right place." Whether he actually spoke these exact words is debated by historians, but there's no question that the moment marked the beginning of an extraordinary transformation. The valley that greeted these pioneers bore little resemblance to the thriving metropolis that would eventually emerge. Much of the land was covered in sagebrush and greasewood, plants that indicated poor soil and limited water. The few streams that flowed from the mountains often disappeared into the earth before reaching the lake, creating an environment that seemed hostile to agriculture. Yet within hours of their arrival, the pioneers were breaking ground for their first crops. They diverted City Creek to irrigate a small plot of land and planted potatoes, corn, and other essential crops. This first agricultural effort was both practical necessity and symbolic act, marking their commitment to making the valley bloom. The transformation had begun, but the challenges they faced were staggering. The growing season was short, water was scarce, and the soil required massive amounts of work to become productive. Native peoples watched with a mixture of curiosity and concern as these newcomers began reshaping the landscape with unprecedented intensity. The pioneers' first winter in the valley was a trial by fire that nearly ended their experiment before it truly began. Temperatures plummeted far below anything they had experienced in the Midwest, and their hastily constructed shelters offered little protection against the bitter mountain winds. Many families huddled together in dugouts carved into hillsides or crude log cabins chinked with mud and snow. Food supplies dwindled alarmingly as the weeks passed. The crops they had planted in late summer yielded far less than expected in the unfamiliar soil and climate. Hunting provided some relief, but game was scarce in the valley floor, and venturing into the mountains during winter storms proved deadly. Several pioneers perished from exposure and starvation during those dark months. By spring 1848, the situation had become desperate. Seeds were so precious that families counted them individually before planting. Then disaster struck in an unexpected form. Clouds of crickets descended upon the valley, devouring the tender shoots of crops that represented the difference between survival and catastrophe. The cricket invasion seemed to spell doom for the struggling settlement. Pioneers tried everything they could think of to save their crops. They built fires, beat the insects with branches, and even tried drowning them in irrigation ditches. Nothing worked. The black masses of crickets continued their relentless advance across the fields. Just when hope seemed lost, flocks of seagulls appeared from the direction of the Great Lake. The birds descended upon the cricket swarms with voracious appetite, gorging themselves until they could barely fly. Day after day, the gulls returned, gradually reducing the cricket population to manageable levels. Enough crops survived to sustain the community through another winter. This event became deeply embedded in pioneer folklore as the miracle of the gulls, seen as divine intervention that saved their sacred experiment. Whether miracle or fortunate ecological coincidence, the incident demonstrated the precarious nature of life in the valley and the determination required to establish a permanent foothold. Word of the pioneers' survival spread eastward, inspiring thousands more to make the arduous journey to what they called Zion. The trickle of 1847 became a stream, then a flood. By 1850, over 11,000 people had gathered in the Salt Lake Valley, creating challenges that dwarfed those faced by the original company. Brigham Young proved to be not just a religious leader, but an extraordinarily capable city planner and territorial administrator. He envisioned Salt Lake City as the centerpiece of a vast inland empire that would stretch across the entire Great Basin. His plans were ambitious, beyond anything attempted in the American West. The city layout he designed reflected both practical considerations and religious symbolism. Streets were laid out in a perfect grid pattern, radiating from a central temple block, with each street wide enough for a wagon and team to turn around. This geometric precision created a sense of order and permanence that distinguished Salt Lake City from the chaotic mining camps and frontier towns springing up elsewhere in the West. Young's vision extended far beyond the city itself. He planned an irrigation system that would transform the entire valley into productive farmland. This was engineering on a scale that seemed impossible given the community's limited resources and primitive tools. They would need to redirect rivers, dig miles of canals, and create an entirely new agricultural landscape. The irrigation project began almost immediately, with the arrival of each new group of settlers. Families were assigned specific sections of canal to dig, and the work continued regardless of weather or season. Men, women, and children all participated in the back-breaking labour of moving earth with shovels, picks, and their bare hands. The scope of the undertaking was staggering. The main canal from City Creek eventually stretched for miles, with dozens of smaller channels branching off to serve individual farms and neighbourhoods. Every yard of this system was hand-dug by people who had never attempted anything remotely similar. Water rights became the foundation of the entire social and economic system. Young established the principle that water belonged to the community rather than to individuals, a radical departure from the property laws governing the rest of America. This communal approach to water management would prove essential to the valley's survival and growth. The transformation of the landscape accelerated as more settlers arrived and the irrigation network expanded. Areas that had been barren sagebrush desert began producing wheat, corn, and vegetables. Orchards were planted in the foothills, taking advantage of better drainage and protection from late frosts. The valley was literally blooming as the pioneers had prophesied. But success brought new challenges and complications. The discovery of gold in California in 1848 created a massive migration of fortune seekers passing directly through the Salt Lake Valley. These travelers brought both opportunities and problems for the growing community. The pioneers quickly realized they could profit enormously by serving as a supply station for California-bound emigrants. They sold food, tools, and fresh livestock while purchasing worn-out animals and equipment at bargain prices. This trade provided crucial cash income and connected the isolated valley to the broader American economy. However, the constant stream of outsiders also brought unwelcome scrutiny of the community's unique practices and beliefs. Rumors began circulating about the pioneers' political loyalties, their treatment of native peoples, and their religious practices. These stories, often wildly exaggerated, would soon create serious conflicts with the federal government. The establishment of the Utah Territory in 1850 marked a significant milestone in the valley's development. Brigham Young was appointed as the first territorial governor, giving the pioneers a degree of official recognition and self-governance they had never enjoyed. Yet this political arrangement also brought them more directly under federal oversight and control. The territorial period saw explosive growth in both population and economic development. New communities sprouted throughout the valley and beyond as settlers spread into neighbouring valleys and canyons. Each settlement followed the same pattern established in Salt Lake City, with central planning, communal irrigation systems, and careful allocation of resources. The construction of the Salt Lake Temple began in 1853, representing both the community's growing confidence and their commitment to making the valley their permanent home. The temple would take 40 years to complete, requiring the movement of massive granite blocks from quarries in the mountains. Every stone was cut and fitted by hand, creating a monument to both faith and human determination. manufacturing began to supplement agriculture as the economic foundation of the territory. The pioneers established mills, foundries, and workshops to reduce their dependence on expensive goods shipped from the east. They were determined to create a self-sufficient society that could survive even if completely cut off from the outside world. The Perpetual Emigrating Fund, established in 1850, systematized the process of bringing new converts to the valley. This remarkable organization provided loans for transportation and supplies, allowing thousands of poor immigrants from Europe and elsewhere to make the journey to Utah. The fund operated on the principle that assisted emigrants would repay their loans and help finance the journey of others. This immigration program brought incredible diversity to the valley. Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, British, and German immigrants arrived in steady streams, each group contributing unique skills and cultural traditions. The polyglot nature of early Salt Lake City created a cosmopolitan atmosphere unusual on the American frontier. The handcart experiment represented perhaps the most ambitious and controversial aspect of the immigration program. Beginning in 1856, some immigrant companies walked across the plains, pulling their possessions in specially constructed handcarts rather than using expensive wagons and oxen. While this method successfully brought thousands of people to Utah at reduced cost, it also resulted in tragedy when late-season companies were caught in early winter storms. The Willie and Martin handcart companies of 1856 faced catastrophic conditions in Wyoming, with hundreds dying from exposure and starvation before rescue parties from Salt Lake City could reach them. These disasters highlighted both the determination of people willing to sacrifice everything to reach Zion and the terrible risks inherent in the massive migration effort. By 1857, the Salt Lake Valley had been transformed beyond recognition. What had been empty desert just 10 years earlier now supported a thriving population of over 40,000 people. Farms covered thousands of acres, towns dotted the landscape, and a complex network of roads connected the scattered settlements. Yet this remarkable success was about to face its greatest test. Tensions with the federal government were escalating rapidly, fueled by misunderstandings, political calculations, and genuine conflicts over the nature of American society. The Utah War was approaching, threatening to destroy everything the pioneers had built in their desert Zion. Zion. The roots of the Utah War lay in fundamental disagreements about the nature of American society and the role of federal authority in territorial governance. As reports filtered back to Washington about the unique social and religious practices in Utah Territory, politicians and journalists began painting increasingly alarming pictures of a theocratic state operating beyond federal control. These concerns were not entirely unfounded. Brigham Young wielded unprecedented authority, serving simultaneously as territorial governor, church president, and commanding general of the territorial militia. The integration of religious and civil authority created a system unlike anything else in American experience, one that many viewed as incompatible with democratic principles. The practice of plural marriage, acknowledged publicly by church leaders in 1852, provided ammunition for critics who portrayed Utah as a place where American law and customs were openly defied. Sensationalized newspaper accounts described the territory as a den of immorality and rebellion, creating public pressure for federal intervention. President James Buchanan, facing his own political challenges, saw an opportunity to demonstrate federal authority while distracting attention from the slavery crisis that was tearing the nation apart. In 1857, he ordered a military expedition to Utah Territory to install a new territorial governor and assert federal control over what he characterized as a rebellious population. The news of approaching federal troops created panic and defiance in equal measure throughout the Salt Lake Valley. Brigham Young declared martial law and called for the territory's defenders to prepare for invasion. The settlers, who had fled religious persecution in the east, now faced the prospect of military occupation by their own government. Young's response was characteristically bold and strategic. Rather than meet the federal army in conventional battle, he ordered a campaign of harassment and delay designed to prevent the troops from reaching the valley before winter. Mormon militiamen burned supply trains, stampeded livestock, and blocked mountain passes, effectively stranding the army in Wyoming. The strategy worked brilliantly. The federal expedition, poorly supplied and unprepared for mountain warfare, found itself trapped in makeshift winter quarters as temperatures plummeted. Meanwhile, Young used the time to prepare the valley for potential evacuation, demonstrating the lengths to which the settlers would go to preserve their independence. The winter of 1857-58 saw one of the most extraordinary preparations for potential exodus in American history. Families throughout the territory stockpiled supplies and prepared to abandon their homes if federal troops attempted to occupy the valley. Cache pits were dug to hide grain and valuables, while plans were made to burn crops and buildings rather than leave them for occupying forces. This period revealed both the strength and the vulnerabilities of the society the pioneers had created. Their unity and organizational capacity were remarkable, allowing them to coordinate resistance across hundreds of square miles of territory. Yet their isolation also made them vulnerable to economic pressure and military blockade. The resolution of the Utah War came through negotiation rather than conquest. Thomas Kane, a Pennsylvania politician friendly to the Mormons, traveled to the territory as an unofficial mediator. His discussions with Young and federal officials led to a face-saving compromise that allowed the army to enter the valley while preserving local autonomy in most matters. The so-called move south that preceded the army's arrival demonstrated the settlers' continued willingness to sacrifice everything for their beliefs. Approximately 30,000 people temporarily abandoned their homes in northern Utah, moving to temporary camps in the southern part of the territory. This massive voluntary evacuation left Salt Lake City virtually empty when federal troops finally marched through its streets. The Army's eventual departure, after establishing Camp Floyd south of the city, marked the end of the immediate crisis, but tensions with federal authority would continue for decades. The Utah War had demonstrated both the settlers' determination to maintain their distinctive society and the federal government's ultimate authority over territorial affairs. The 1860s brought new challenges and opportunities that would fundamentally reshape the valley's relationship with the outside world. The Civil War diverted federal attention from Utah, allowing the territory to develop with less outside interference. At the same time, the discovery of precious metals in nearby mountains brought waves of non-Mormon prospectors and miners into the region. The mining boom created complex dynamics within the valley. While church leaders generally discouraged their followers from participating directly in mining speculation, they recognized the economic opportunities presented by supplying mining camps with food, lumber, and manufactured goods. This trade brought unprecedented prosperity to many valley communities. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 marked perhaps the most significant turning point in the valley's history since the arrival of the first pioneers. The ceremony at Promontory Summit, just north of the Great Salt Lake, symbolically connected Utah to both the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, ending the isolation that had defined the territory's early development. Railroad construction itself provided enormous economic stimulus to the valley. The Central Pacific and Union Pacific railroads employed thousands of workers, creating markets for local agricultural and manufactured products. The construction camps required constant supplies of food, lumber, and equipment, much of which came from Salt Lake Valley producers. The railroad's completion transformed Salt Lake City from an isolated frontier settlement into a major transportation hub virtually overnight. Passengers and freight could now reach the city in days rather than months, connecting it directly to national markets and communications networks. This accessibility brought both opportunities and challenges for the unique society the pioneers had created. Non-Mormon immigration increased dramatically once railroad transportation made the journey to Utah quick and affordable. These newcomers, often called Gentiles by the Mormon population, established businesses, newspapers, and political organizations that challenged the religious community's dominance. The valley's population became increasingly diverse and complex. The territorial period also saw the establishment of institutions that would define Salt Lake City's character for generations to come. The University of Utah, founded in 1850 as the University of Deseret, provided higher education opportunities unusual on the frontier. The institution reflected the community's commitment to learning and intellectual development alongside spiritual growth. The Salt Lake Theater, completed in 1862, became a cultural center that rivaled anything found in much larger cities. The elaborate structure hosted touring companies from the East and local productions that drew audiences from throughout the territory. This emphasis on cultural refinement challenged stereotypes about frontier society and demonstrated the community's sophisticated aspirations. The development of local industries continued to reduce dependence on imported goods while providing employment for the growing population. The Walker brothers established one of the West's major mercantile empires, while Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution became a model for cooperative enterprise. These businesses demonstrated that the valley could compete economically with established commercial centers. Agricultural development reached new levels of sophistication during this period. The introduction of new crops and farming techniques increased productivity while diversifying the valley's agricultural base. Sugar beet cultivation, encouraged by church leaders as a way to reduce dependence on imported sugar, became a major industry that would persist well into the 20th century. The irrigation system that had begun as a desperate necessity evolved into one of the most sophisticated water management networks in the American West. By the 1870s, hundreds of miles of canals carried mountain snowmelt to farms throughout the valley, supporting agriculture that seemed miraculous to visitors from more humid regions. Water remained the key to everything else the community accomplished. The elaborate system of water rights and distribution that Brigham Young had established became a model studied by other arid regions. This communal approach to water management enabled intensive agriculture that would have been impossible under individual ownership systems. The valley's transportation network also expanded dramatically during the territorial period. Roads connected every settlement to the central city, while stage lines provided regular service to distant communities. The Pony Express briefly passed through the valley, linking it to the national communications network before the railroad made such services obsolete. The territorial legislature established in 1850 created frameworks for local governance, while maintaining the integration of religious and civil authority that characterized early Utah society. This unique system allowed for efficient decision-making and resource allocation, while ensuring that development proceeded according to centrally planned priorities. Education received extraordinary emphasis throughout the territorial period. The common school system established in the 1850s provided free elementary education to all children, regardless of their families' economic circumstances. This commitment to universal education reflected both practical needs for an educated workforce and religious beliefs about the importance of knowledge and learning. The establishment of Brigham Young Academy in 1875 added another dimension to the valley's educational infrastructure. This institution, which would eventually become Brigham Young University, provided advanced education opportunities while maintaining the religious character that defined the community's approach to learning. Cultural development paralleled educational advancement throughout this period. Musical societies, literary clubs, and dramatic organizations flourished in communities throughout the valley. This cultural sophistication challenged Eastern stereotypes about frontier society while providing enrichment for residents who might otherwise have felt isolated from civilization's amenities. The valley's unique social experiments continue to evolve and adapt to changing circumstances. The United Order, an attempt to establish economic cooperation based on religious principles, was tried in various communities with mixed results. While these experiments rarely achieved their intended goals completely, they demonstrated the community's willingness to try innovative approaches to social organization. By the late 1870s, Salt Lake City had emerged as one of the most significant urban centers in the American West. Its population exceeded 20,000, making it larger than Seattle, Portland, or Denver. The city's prosperity and sophistication impressed visitors who had expected to find a crude frontier settlement dominated by religious fanaticism. Yet this success also intensified conflicts with federal authority and non-Mormon populations. The practice of plural marriage continued to generate national controversy, while the integration of church and state remained a source of tension with federal officials. These conflicts would soon escalate into renewed crisis that would test everything the pioneers had built. The approaching statehood movement represented both the culmination of territorial development and the beginning of a new phase in the valley's history. The question of whether Utah could maintain its distinctive character while joining the Union as a state would dominate the next decade and ultimately reshape the society that had emerged from the desert wilderness. The 1880s brought unprecedented pressure from Washington as the federal government launched what became known as the Great Raid against plural marriage and church political influence. Federal marshals swept through the valley, arresting hundreds of men, while legislation stripped voting rights from anyone practicing or believing in plural marriage. This systematic campaign threatened to destroy the social fabric that had held the community together for 4 decades. The Edmunds Act of 1882 and the even more severe Edmunds-Tucker Act of 1887 represented the most serious challenge to the valley's way of life since the Utah War. These laws not only criminalized plural marriage, but also dissolved the church as a legal corporation and seized its property. The federal government was essentially attempting to dismantle the institutions that had created Salt Lake City's unique character. Many prominent citizens were forced into hiding or exile to avoid arrest. Brigham Young had died in 1877, and his successors found themselves navigating an increasingly hostile legal environment. Underground networks developed to help polygamous families avoid detection, creating a climate of secrecy and fear that pervaded daily life throughout the valley. The economic impact of federal persecution was devastating. Church-sponsored businesses faced constant legal challenges, while the seizure of church property disrupted investment and development plans. The cooperative enterprises that had driven much of the valley's economic growth found themselves operating under constant threat of dissolution. Yet even under this extreme pressure, the community's resilience and adaptability shone through. New businesses emerged to replace those that were shuttered, while educational and cultural institutions found ways to continue operating despite legal challenges. The valley's residents demonstrated once again their capacity to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The resolution of these conflicts required fundamental changes in the society the pioneers had created. Church leaders gradually distanced themselves from direct political control, while the practice of plural marriage was officially discontinued through the 1890 Manifesto. These concessions cleared the way for statehood negotiations while preserving the community's core religious identity. Utah's admission to the Union as the 45th state in 1896 marked the end of the territorial period and the beginning of a new chapter in Salt Lake City's development. Statehood brought full participation in national political and economic systems, while allowing the community to maintain much of its distinctive character. The statehood celebration in Salt Lake City was unlike anything the Valley had ever witnessed. Tens of thousands of people gathered in the streets to commemorate the achievement that had seemed impossible just a few years earlier. The festivities demonstrated both pride in what had been accomplished and optimism about the future. The new state constitution reflected the compromises necessary to achieve statehood while preserving local values and institutions. Religious freedom was guaranteed, but the integration of church and state that had characterized the territorial period was formally ended. This separation created space for diverse religious and political perspectives while maintaining social cohesion. The 1890s also saw the arrival of new technologies that would transform daily life in the valley. Electric lighting began replacing gas and oil lamps, while telephone lines connected the city to national communications networks. These innovations brought Salt Lake City into the modern age while maintaining its unique identity and character. The discovery of rich mineral deposits in the mountains surrounding the valley created new economic opportunities that diversified the region's economy beyond agriculture and trade. The Bingham Canyon copper mine, which began operations in the 1890s, would eventually become one of the world's largest open-pit mines, fundamentally altering the economic landscape. Mining brought thousands of new residents to the valley, many from different cultural and religious backgrounds than the original pioneers. These newcomers established their own neighborhoods, businesses, and institutions, creating a more pluralistic society than had existed during the early territorial period. The establishment of Fort Douglas in 1862 had already introduced a permanent federal military presence to the valley, but the post-statehood period saw expanded military activities that brought additional economic benefits and population diversity. The fort became an important training facility and supply depot that connected Salt Lake City to national defense networks. Transportation continued to evolve as the valley's population and economic importance grew. Electric streetcar systems replaced horse-drawn vehicles for local transportation, while improved railroad connections enhanced links to distant markets. These transportation improvements supported continued urban growth and suburban development. The Salt Lake Stock Exchange, established in 1896, reflected the city's growing importance as a financial center for the Intermountain West. Mining speculation and investment created new forms of wealth while connecting local entrepreneurs to national capital markets. This financial sophistication marked another step in the city's evolution from frontier settlement to modern metropolis. Cultural institutions flourished during the early statehood period as the community's wealth and confidence grew. The Salt Lake City public library system expanded throughout the valley, while museums and art galleries provided opportunities for intellectual and cultural enrichment. These institutions reflected the community's continued commitment to education and cultural development. The turn of the 20th century found Salt Lake City transformed beyond recognition from the barren valley that had greeted the first pioneers just 50 years earlier. The population had grown to over 50,000, making it one of the largest cities in the American West. Modern amenities and institutions rivaled those found in much older eastern cities. The agricultural foundation that had sustained the early community remained important, but manufacturing and service industries now provided the majority of employment opportunities. Factories produced everything from textiles to machinery, while wholesale and retail establishments served customers throughout the region. The irrigation system that had begun as a desperate survival measure had evolved into a sophisticated water management network that supported both urban and agricultural development. Reservoirs in the mountains stored winter snowmelt for summer use, while an intricate canal system delivered water precisely where and when it was needed. Urban planning during this period reflected both practical considerations and aesthetic aspirations. Wide streets accommodated increasing traffic, while parks and public spaces provided recreational opportunities for residents. The city's geometric layout, established by the original pioneers, proved remarkably adaptable to modern urban needs. The construction of new public buildings during the early 1900s demonstrated both civic pride and confidence in the future. The Utah State Capitol, begun in 1912, would eventually crown the foothills overlooking the valley with a magnificent dome visible from throughout the region. This architectural masterpiece symbolized Utah's full integration into the American political system. Religious diversity increased significantly during this period as non-Mormon denominations established churches and schools throughout the valley. While the original religious community remained dominant, the presence of multiple faiths created a more pluralistic atmosphere that welcomed diverse perspectives and traditions. Educational opportunities expanded dramatically as the state university grew in size and reputation. New academic programs and research facilities attracted students and faculty from throughout the nation, while public schools provided education that met the highest contemporary standards. The valley's unique history and dramatic landscape began attracting increasing numbers of tourists and visitors. Hotels and restaurants catered to travelers who came to see the famous Mormon temple and experience the remarkable transformation of desert into garden. Tourism became an increasingly important economic sector that showcased the community's achievements. Labor organizations emerged during this period as workers sought better wages and working conditions in the expanding industrial economy. While conflicts sometimes arose between workers and employers, the valley generally avoided the violent labor disputes that plagued other Western industrial centers. The progressive era brought new ideas about urban planning, public health, and social reform that influenced Salt Lake City's continued development. City Beautiful movements inspired improvements to parks and public spaces, while public health initiatives addressed sanitation and disease prevention in the growing urban environment. Women's suffrage came early to Utah, with women gaining the right to vote in territorial elections in 1870, though this right was later revoked by federal legislation before being restored with statehood. This early recognition of women's political rights reflected the community's distinctive approach to social organization. The valley's location continued to provide strategic advantages as transportation networks expanded across the continent. Salt Lake City became a major hub for railroad traffic, moving between the eastern and western United States, while its position made it a natural stopping point for travelers and freight shipments. By 1910, the transformation of the Salt Lake Valley was essentially complete. What had begun as an impossible dream of creating Zion in the desert had become a thriving modern city that preserved its unique character while embracing technological and social progress. The next challenges would come from global events that would test the community's resilience in new and unprecedented ways. The Great War that erupted in Europe in 1914 seemed distant from the peaceful valleys of Utah, but its impact would ripple across the Atlantic to transform Salt Lake City in ways no one could have anticipated. As America entered the conflict in 1917, the valley's strategic location and industrial capacity suddenly became crucial to the national war effort. Camp Kearns, established south of Salt Lake City, became one of the largest military training facilities in the western United States. Over 60,000 soldiers passed through the camp during the war years, bringing an unprecedented influx of people and money to the region. Local businesses expanded rapidly to meet the demands of this massive military presence, while families throughout the valley opened their homes to visiting relatives and sweethearts of the trainees. The war effort transformed the valley's industrial landscape almost overnight. Manufacturing facilities that had previously produced agricultural equipment and consumer goods were retooled to produce military supplies. The Remington Arms Company established a major ammunition plant that employed thousands of workers, many of them women entering the industrial workforce for the first time. This industrial expansion accelerated changes that had been building for decades. The valley's economy, once dominated by agriculture and mining, now included sophisticated manufacturing that rivaled production centres in the east. Technical expertise developed during the war years would prove invaluable as the region continued to diversify its economic base. The influenza pandemic that followed the war tested the community's resilience in ways that recalled the early pioneer struggles. The disease struck with devastating suddenness in the fall of 1918, overwhelming hospitals and claiming lives across all segments of society. Public gatherings were banned, schools closed, and even religious services were suspended as authorities struggled to contain the outbreak. The community's response to the pandemic revealed both strengths and vulnerabilities that had developed over 7 decades of settlement. The same organisational capacity that had built irrigation systems and coordinated massive migrations now mobilised to care for the sick and prevent further spread. Volunteer networks emerged spontaneously, while medical professionals worked around the clock to treat victims. The 1920s brought prosperity and growth that seemed to vindicate every sacrifice the pioneers had made. The valley's population surged past 100,000 as new industries attracted workers from across the nation. Automobile manufacturing, food processing, and chemical production joined mining and agriculture as major economic pillars, supporting continued expansion. The automobile revolution transformed daily life in ways that rivaled the impact of the railroad 50 years earlier. Paved roads connected even the most remote valley settlements to the central city, while suburban development began spreading across previously agricultural land. The freedom of movement that automobiles provided allowed residents to live farther from their work while maintaining connections to urban amenities. Radio broadcasting arrived in Salt Lake City in 1922, connecting valley residents to national entertainment and news networks for the first time. Local stations developed programming that reflected the community's distinctive culture, while also bringing outside perspectives into homes throughout the region. This technological revolution created new forms of shared experience that transcended geographical boundaries. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir began broadcasting weekly programs that carried the valley's musical traditions to audiences across the continent. These broadcasts, which would continue for decades, introduced millions of Americans to the cultural achievements of the desert community while demonstrating its full integration into national life. Architecture during this period reflected both prosperity and changing aesthetic sensibilities. Art Deco buildings rose in the downtown area, while residential neighborhoods featured styles influenced by national trends adapted to local climate and materials. The valley's built environment began reflecting its position as a modern American city rather than a frontier settlement. Educational institutions expanded dramatically to meet the needs of the growing population. The University of Utah developed new programs in engineering, business, and the sciences, while maintaining its traditional strengths in liberal arts and teacher education. This academic growth attracted students and faculty from throughout the nation, further diversifying the valley's intellectual and cultural life. The establishment of national parks in the surrounding region brought increasing numbers of tourists to Salt Lake City as a gateway to some of America's most spectacular natural wonders. Zion, Bryce Canyon, and other nearby parks drew visitors who often spent several days in the city before and after their wilderness adventures. This tourism provided economic benefits while showcasing the valley's transformation. The stock market crash of 1929 and the subsequent Great Depression tested the community's resilience in ways reminiscent of the early pioneer struggles. Unemployment soared as mining operations closed and construction projects were abandoned. Banks failed, businesses shuttered, and families who had enjoyed prosperity suddenly faced destitution. Yet the valley's residents drew upon traditions of cooperation and mutual aid that had sustained their predecessors through earlier crises. Community gardens provided food for unemployed families, while church and civic organizations coordinated relief efforts. The same spirit of collective responsibility that had built irrigation systems now organized soup kitchens and job creation programs. Federal New Deal programs brought unprecedented government investment to the region during the 1930s. The Works Progress Administration funded construction of roads, bridges, and public buildings throughout the valley, providing employment while creating infrastructure that would support future growth. These projects demonstrated the federal government's commitment to the region's development while maintaining local control over implementation. The Civilian Conservation Corps established camps throughout the surrounding mountains, employing young men in forest management and park development projects. These programs not only provided desperately needed employment, but also created recreational facilities that would attract visitors for generations to come. The construction of Hoover Dam in the early 1930s, while located hundreds of miles away, had profound implications for the Salt Lake Valley's development. The massive project demonstrated the potential for large-scale water and power development that could transform entire regions. Engineering expertise gained during the dam's construction would later prove valuable for projects closer to home. Recovery from the Depression was gradual but steady throughout the late 1930s. Mining operations resumed as metal prices recovered, while agricultural production benefited from improved irrigation and new farming techniques. Manufacturing began to diversify beyond traditional products, laying foundations for the industrial expansion that would come with the next World War. The valley's cultural life flourished during the Depression years despite economic hardships. Community theatres, musical organisations, and literary societies provided entertainment and intellectual stimulation for residents who had limited resources for commercial recreation. This cultural renaissance demonstrated the community's commitment to maintaining quality of life even during difficult times. The approach of World War II brought new opportunities and challenges that would fundamentally reshape the valley's relationship with the outside world. Defense contracts began flowing to local manufacturers even before America entered the war, stimulating economic recovery while preparing the region for its crucial role in the global conflict. The establishment of military installations throughout the region reflected the valley's strategic importance for training and logistics. Hill Air Force Base, located north of Salt Lake City, became a major maintenance and supply facility for aircraft operating throughout the Pacific Theater. This military presence brought thousands of personnel to the region, while establishing connections that would persist long after the war's end. Defense industries transformed the valley's manufacturing sector as companies converted to wartime production or established new facilities to meet military needs. The Geneva steel plant, built during the war years, became one of the largest industrial facilities in the Intermountain West. These installations demonstrated the region's capacity for large-scale industrial production, while providing employment for thousands of workers. The war effort also brought unprecedented ethnic and racial diversity to the valley, as workers arrived from throughout the nation to fill defense jobs. African American, Hispanic, and other minority workers established communities that added new dimensions to the region's cultural landscape. This diversity created both opportunities and tensions that would influence social development for decades. Japanese American internees were housed at Topaz, a relocation center located west of Salt Lake City in the desert, While this represented one of the darkest chapters in American history, some Valley residents demonstrated courage and compassion by assisting internees and advocating for their rights. These actions reflected enduring values of human dignity and mutual aid that had characterized the community since its founding. The war years saw the emergence of new technologies and industries that would shape the Valley's post-war development. Research and development facilities established to support the war effort continued operating after 1945, creating a foundation for high-technology industries that would become increasingly important in the regional economy. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers during the war years, taking jobs in manufacturing, transportation, and other sectors previously dominated by men. This social transformation challenged traditional gender roles while demonstrating women's capabilities in areas beyond domestic responsibilities. The changes would have lasting impacts on family structure and social organisation throughout the Valley. Victory in 1945 marked the beginning of a new era of growth and prosperity that would continue for decades. The Valley's population had grown to nearly 200,000, making Salt Lake City one of the most significant urban centers in the American West. The economic diversification achieved during the war years provided a foundation for sustained expansion that would transform the Desert Valley into a major metropolitan area. The post-war boom years saw suburban development accelerate as returning veterans used government benefits to purchase homes in new neighborhoods spreading across the valley floor. Shopping centers and commercial strips followed residential development, creating a more dispersed urban form than had existed during the compact early decades. The development of the interstate highway system during the 1950s and 1960s reinforced Salt Lake City's position as a transportation hub while facilitating continued suburban expansion. The Valley's location at the intersection of major east-west and north-south routes made it a natural stopping point for travelers and freight shipments crossing the continent. Higher education expanded dramatically during the post-war years as veterans took advantage of the GI Bill to pursue college degrees. The University of Utah grew rapidly in both size and academic reputation, while new institutions emerged to serve specific educational needs. This educational expansion created a more skilled workforce while attracting research and development activities that diversified the economic base. The emergence of the aerospace industry during the 1950s brought high-technology manufacturing to the Valley for the first time. Companies like Thiokol Corporation established facilities to produce rocket motors and other space-age technologies. These industries required highly skilled workers while generating spin-off businesses that further diversified the regional economy. The growth of the recreation and tourism industry reflected the Valley's unique natural setting and cultural heritage. Ski resorts in the nearby mountains attracted visitors from throughout the nation, while cultural attractions showcased the community's distinctive history and achievements. This tourism provided economic benefits while raising the region's national profile. By 1960, the Salt Lake Valley had been transformed into a thriving metropolitan area that preserved its distinctive character while embracing modern American life. The population exceeded 300,000, making it one of the fastest growing regions in the nation. The economic base had diversified far beyond the agriculture and mining that had sustained earlier generations. The valley's transformation from barren desert to modern metropolis represented one of the most remarkable achievements in American history. What had begun as an impossible dream of creating Zion in the wilderness had evolved into a sophisticated urban region that contributed significantly to the nation's economic, cultural, and intellectual life. Yet challenges remained as rapid growth strained infrastructure and threatened the natural environment that had attracted people to the region. Air quality declined as automobile use increased, while urban sprawl consumed agricultural land and natural habitats. These issues would require the same spirit of cooperation and innovation that had sustained the community through earlier challenges. The story of Salt Lake City's development would continue to unfold in the coming decades, but the fundamental transformation had been completed. The desert had indeed bloomed, not through miraculous intervention, but through the sustained efforts of generations of people who refused to accept that their dreams were impossible. The transformation accelerated through the 1970s and 1980s as Salt Lake City emerged as a major center for technology and finance in the American West. The establishment of computer and software companies transformed former industrial districts into gleaming office parks, while financial institutions expanded their operations to serve customers throughout the Intermountain region. This economic diversification created new forms of prosperity that would have seemed impossible to the pioneers who first broke ground in the desert. The development of the TRAX light rail system in the 1990s represented a return to the community planning principles that had guided the valley's earliest development. Just as Brigham Young had envisioned wide streets and organized development, modern planners sought to create efficient transportation networks that would serve a growing population while preserving the region's livability and environmental quality. The selection of Salt Lake City to host the 2002 Winter Olympics marked perhaps the most significant milestone in the valley's evolution since statehood. The announcement in 1995 triggered massive infrastructure improvements and urban renewal projects that transformed the downtown core and surrounding areas. New sports venues, transportation systems, and cultural facilities created a modern, metropolitan landscape while showcasing the region's achievements to a global audience. Preparation for the Olympics required coordination and cooperation on a scale reminiscent of the great pioneer projects of the 19th century. Thousands of volunteers contributed their time and skills, while public and private organizations worked together to create facilities and services worthy of international attention. The same spirit of collective effort that had built irrigation canals now constructed world-class athletic venues and cultural centers. The games themselves provided an unprecedented opportunity to display the valley's transformation to the world. Television coverage carried images of snow-capped mountains, modern urban landscapes, and enthusiastic crowds to billions of viewers worldwide. The contrast between the barren desert described in pioneer journals and the sophisticated metropolitan area hosting international competition could hardly have been more dramatic. The Olympic legacy extended far beyond the 17 days of competition. New transportation infrastructure, including expanded highway systems and improved public transit, enhanced mobility throughout the region. Cultural facilities created for Olympic celebrations continued serving residents and visitors long after the athletes departed. Most importantly, the Games demonstrated the valley's capacity to organize and execute complex projects on a global scale. The early 21st century brought new challenges that tested the community's adaptability in familiar ways. Rapid population growth strained water resources that had sustained development for over 150 years. Air quality concerns recalled the smoky conditions that had plagued earlier industrial development. Urban sprawl threatened the agricultural lands that had once seemed limitless. Yet residents drew upon traditions of innovation and cooperation to address these modern challenges. Water conservation programs employed new technologies while maintaining the communal approach to resource management that had sustained the valley since pioneer times. Air quality improvement efforts combined regulatory measures with voluntary lifestyle changes that reflected enduring values of community responsibility. The technology boom of the 1990s and 2000s brought unprecedented prosperity while creating new forms of economic opportunity. Software companies, biotechnology firms, and other high-tech industries established operations throughout the valley, creating jobs that required advanced education while generating wealth that supported continued growth and development. The establishment of research parks near the University of Utah created clusters of innovation that attracted national and international companies. These developments demonstrated the valley's evolution from a resource-based economy to one founded on knowledge, creativity, and technological sophistication. The transformation paralleled the earlier shift from subsistence agriculture to diversified manufacturing. Cultural institutions flourished during this period of prosperity and growth. New museums, theatres, and concert halls provided world-class entertainment and educational opportunities. The Utah Symphony achieved international recognition, while local theatre companies and dance organisations created programming that rivaled offerings in much larger cities. This cultural sophistication reflected the community's continued commitment to education and intellectual development. The valley's universities expanded dramatically to meet the demands of the modern economy. The University of Utah developed into a major research institution with nationally ranked programs in medicine, engineering, and the sciences. Utah State University and other institutions provided specialized education that supported economic diversification while maintaining connections to the region's agricultural heritage. Immigration patterns during this period reflected global economic changes, while echoing earlier waves of newcomers seeking opportunity in the valley. Technology workers from Asia, refugees from various global conflicts, and economic migrants from Latin America added new dimensions to the region's cultural landscape. This diversity created both opportunities and challenges reminiscent of earlier periods of rapid growth. The housing boom of the early 2000s accelerated suburban development across the valley floor and into surrounding foothills. New communities sprouted in areas that had been agricultural land just decades earlier, while existing neighborhoods experienced intensive redevelopment. This growth provided opportunities for home ownership, while raising concerns about environmental impact and infrastructure capacity. The financial crisis of 2008 brought economic challenges that recalled earlier periods of hardship and testing. Construction projects halted, unemployment rose, and families faced foreclosure on homes they had purchased during the boom years. Yet the community's response demonstrated the same resilience and mutual support that had sustained earlier generations through difficult times. Recovery from the Great Recession was gradual but steady, supported by economic diversification that prevented the complete collapse experienced in regions dependent on single industries. Technology companies continued expanding, while tourism and recreation industries provided stable employment. The valley's location and quality of life attracted new businesses seeking alternatives to higher-cost metropolitan areas. The emergence of outdoor recreation as a major economic sector reflected the valley's unique natural setting and the community's evolving relationship with the surrounding landscape. World-class skiing, hiking, climbing, and other activities attracted visitors while providing lifestyle amenities that helped recruit high-skilled workers to local businesses. This recreation economy built upon natural assets that had once seemed like obstacles to development. Climate change concerns during the early 21st century focused attention on water resources that had always been central to the valley's survival and prosperity. Declining snowpack in surrounding mountains threatened the water supplies that sustained both urban and agricultural development. These challenges required innovative approaches to conservation and management that honoured traditions while embracing new technologies. The development of alternative energy industries reflected both environmental concerns and economic opportunities. Solar and wind power projects in the surrounding desert created new forms of economic activity while reducing dependence on fossil fuels. These initiatives demonstrated the valley's continued capacity for innovation and adaptation in response to changing circumstances. Urban planning during this period balanced growth pressures with quality of life concerns that had always been central to the community's identity. Transit-oriented development concentrated new construction near light rail lines, while open space preservation protected natural areas that provided recreational opportunities and environmental benefits. These planning approaches honoured the geometric precision of the original city layout, while adapting to modern needs. The valley's emergence as a major centre for financial services reflected its strategic location and business-friendly environment. Regional banks expanded their operations throughout the Intermountain West, while investment firms and insurance companies established significant presences. This financial sector growth provided high-paying jobs, while supporting economic development throughout the broader region. Cultural diversity continued expanding as the valley attracted residents from throughout the United States and around the world. New restaurants, festivals, and cultural organizations reflected this growing diversity while maintaining connections to the pioneer heritage that had shaped the community's character. The challenge of balancing change with continuity echoed dilemmas faced by earlier generations. The development of major shopping and entertainment districts transformed areas that had once been industrial or agricultural. Gateway, the shops at Southtown, and other commercial centres provided retail and dining options that rivaled those found in much larger metropolitan areas. These developments reflected rising prosperity while creating gathering places for an increasingly diverse population. Educational achievement remained a community priority as it had since pioneer times. Utah consistently ranked among the top states for literacy rates and educational attainment, while local school districts earned recognition for innovation and effectiveness. This commitment to learning reflected enduring values while providing the skilled workforce necessary for continued economic development. The valley's reputation as a centre for entrepreneurship and innovation attracted venture capital and startup companies seeking supportive environments for new business development. Technology incubators, business accelerators, and networking organizations created ecosystems that nurtured innovation while maintaining the collaborative spirit that had always characterized the community. International connections expanded dramatically as globalization brought new opportunities and challenges. Sister city relationships, trade missions, and cultural exchanges connected Salt Lake City to communities worldwide while maintaining its distinctive identity. The 2002 Olympics had introduced the valley to the world. Subsequent decades saw those relationships deepen and multiply. The preservation of historic sites and buildings became increasingly important as rapid development threatened to erase physical connections to the pioneer past. Historic districts, museum developments, and heritage tourism initiatives sought to maintain tangible links to the community's founding while accommodating modern needs. This preservation effort reflected the same careful stewardship that had sustained earlier generations. By 2010, the Salt Lake Valley had evolved into a sophisticated metropolitan region that ranked among the most livable and economically dynamic areas in the United States. The population exceeded 1 million, making it one of the fastest growing regions in the nation. Yet this growth had occurred while maintaining many of the qualities that had originally attracted settlers to the desert valley. The recession's end brought renewed growth and development that continued the valley's remarkable transformation. New residential projects, commercial developments, and infrastructure improvements reflected confidence in the region's future, while building upon foundations laid by previous generations. The desert that had once seemed hostile to human habitation now supported a thriving metropolitan area that contributed significantly to the national economy. Technology companies continued expanding their presence throughout the valley, creating what some observers called a new Silicon Valley in the desert. Major corporations established regional headquarters, while local entrepreneurs launched innovative ventures that competed in global markets. This technological sophistication represented the latest chapter in a story of continuous adaptation and innovation. The Valley's universities achieved new levels of recognition and research funding that supported both economic development and intellectual advancement. Medical research, engineering innovation, and scientific discovery created knowledge that benefited communities far beyond the region while attracting talented individuals from around the world. This academic excellence honoured traditions of learning while embracing cutting-edge investigation. Cultural institutions reached new heights of achievement and recognition during this period. The Utah Symphony and Opera achieved international acclaim, while local theatre companies and dance organisations created programming that attracted national attention. Museums and galleries showcased both regional heritage and contemporary artistic expression, creating cultural amenities that enhanced quality of life while attracting visitors and new residents. The outdoor recreation industry continued expanding as the valley's natural setting became increasingly valuable for both economic and lifestyle reasons. Ski resorts upgraded facilities and expanded operations, while new recreational opportunities emerged in surrounding mountains and deserts. This industry built upon natural assets while creating employment and attracting businesses seeking locations that offered exceptional quality of life. Environmental stewardship became increasingly important as growth pressures threatened the natural systems that had always sustained valley development. Air quality improvement programs, water conservation initiatives, and open space preservation efforts reflected the same careful resource management that had characterized pioneer settlement. These environmental programs demonstrated that continued growth and environmental protection could be compatible goals. The valley's emergence as a major transportation hub reflected both its geographic advantages and significant infrastructure investments. The international airport expanded to serve destinations throughout the world, while freight rail and trucking operations connected regional businesses to national and international markets. These transportation assets supported continued economic diversification while maintaining the strategic advantages that had originally attracted settlement. Urban development during the 2010s balanced density and livability in ways that honoured the community's planning heritage while meeting contemporary needs. Mixed-use projects created walkable neighbourhoods that reduced automobile dependence, while transit-oriented development concentrated growth near public transportation. These planning approaches created more sustainable development patterns while maintaining the human scale that had always characterized valley communities. The continuing influx of new residents from diverse backgrounds created both opportunities and challenges reminiscent of earlier immigration waves. Technology workers, refugees, retirees, and others brought new perspectives and skills while adapting to local culture and conditions. This diversity enriched community life while requiring ongoing efforts to maintain social cohesion and shared purpose. Financial services continued expanding as regional banks and investment firms grew to serve customers throughout the Intermountain West. This sector provided high-paying employment while supporting business development in other industries. The valley's reputation for business-friendly policies and ethical practices attracted companies seeking stable environments for long-term growth. The development of life sciences and biotechnology industries reflected both educational strengths and strategic economic development efforts. Research institutions, pharmaceutical companies, and medical device manufacturers established operations that created high-skilled employment while contributing to human health and well-being. These industries represented new forms of economic activity that built upon the valley's tradition of innovation and problem-solving. As the second decade of the 21st century progressed, Salt Lake City had clearly established itself as one of America's most successful metropolitan regions. The transformation from barren desert to thriving urban center represented an achievement that few observers in 1847 could have imagined possible. Yet each generation had built upon the foundations laid by their predecessors while adapting to new opportunities and challenges. The story of Salt Lake City's development from wilderness to metropolis demonstrated the power of vision, determination, and cooperative effort to overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. The same qualities that had enabled pioneers to create irrigation systems and build communities in the desert continue to drive innovation and adaptation in the modern era. The desert had indeed become Zion, not through miraculous transformation, but through the sustained efforts of people who refused to accept limitations as permanent barriers to their aspirations. Zion, not through miraculous transformation, as permanent barriers who refuse to accept limitations, but through the sustained efforts of people aspire to their nations. The arrival of the 2020s brought unprecedented challenges that tested the valley's resilience in ways that recalled the most difficult periods of its history. The global pandemic that swept across the world in early 2020 forced businesses to close, schools to empty, and families to shelter in their homes for months at a time. Yet the community's response demonstrated the same spirit of mutual aid and collective problem-solving that had sustained earlier generations through crisis and hardship. Healthcare systems throughout the valley mobilized with remarkable efficiency, drawing upon organizational traditions that traced back to pioneer-era cooperation. Hospitals expanded capacity, while medical professionals worked tirelessly to treat patients and prevent further spread. Community volunteers emerged to deliver groceries to elderly residents and support families facing economic hardship, demonstrating that the bonds of mutual responsibility remained strong even in an age of suburban dispersal and digital communication. The economic disruption caused by pandemic restrictions revealed both vulnerabilities and strengths in the valley's diversified economy. Tourism and hospitality industries suffered devastating losses as travel restrictions eliminated visitors to ski resorts and recreational areas. Yet technology companies found their services in greater demand than ever as remote work became the norm across many industries. This economic resilience reflected decades of careful diversification that prevented the complete collapse experienced in regions dependent on single sectors. Remote work technologies transformed daily life in ways that recalled earlier transportation revolutions. Just as railroads and automobiles had reshaped how people lived and worked, high-speed internet and video conferencing allowed valley residents to maintain professional connections across vast distances while remaining rooted in their mountain communities. This technological revolution created new possibilities for economic development while preserving the quality of life that had always attracted people to the region. The pandemic's impact on education required rapid innovations that built upon the valley's long tradition of educational excellence. Schools and universities shifted to online instruction with remarkable speed, while teachers and students adapted to new forms of learning and communication. These educational adaptations demonstrated the same flexibility and resourcefulness that had characterized the community's response to earlier challenges. Recovery from the pandemic began gradually in 2021 as vaccines became available and restrictions eased. The valley's economy rebounded more quickly than many regions, supported by strong fundamentals and diverse industries that had weathered the crisis. New businesses emerged to serve changing consumer needs, while existing companies adapted their operations to post-pandemic conditions. The housing boom that accompanied recovery created both opportunities and challenges reminiscent of earlier growth periods. Demand for homes in the valley surged as remote workers sought locations that offered natural beauty, outdoor recreation, and reasonable cost of living. This influx of new residents drove housing prices to record levels, while straining infrastructure and changing neighbourhood character in ways that recalled earlier waves of rapid growth. Water resources remained central to all discussions of future development, as climate change and population growth created unprecedented demands on limited supplies. The Great Salt Lake reached historic low levels during the early 2020s, raising concerns about dust storms, ecosystem collapse, and long-term sustainability. These challenges required innovative approaches to conservation and management that honoured the communal water traditions established by the pioneers while embracing new technologies and policies. The development of drought-resistant landscaping and water-efficient technologies reflected the same pragmatic adaptation that had always characterised valley residents. Just as pioneers had learned to work with desert conditions rather than fight them, modern communities embraced xeriscaping and conservation practices that reduced water consumption while maintaining livable environments. These adaptations demonstrated continuing capacity for innovation in response to environmental constraints. Air quality concerns intensified during this period as population growth and climate change created more frequent temperature inversions that trapped pollutants in the valley. The brown haze that occasionally shrouded the mountains recalled the smoky conditions that had plagued earlier industrial periods, requiring new approaches to transportation and energy use that could maintain economic vitality while protecting public health. The expansion of electric vehicle infrastructure and renewable energy systems reflected both environmental concerns and economic opportunities. Solar installations proliferated across valley rooftops, while wind projects in surrounding deserts generated clean electricity for growing populations. These energy developments built upon the region's tradition of resource innovation while addressing modern environmental challenges. Transit system expansions continued the tradition of careful urban planning that had characterized valley development since pioneer times. New light rail lines extended service to growing suburban areas, while bus rapid transit systems provided efficient connections throughout the metropolitan region. These transportation investments honored the geometric precision of the original city layout while adapting to contemporary mobility needs. The technology sector continued expanding during the 2020s as major corporations established regional operations and local startups achieved national prominence. Software development, cybersecurity, and financial technology companies created high-paying employment while attracting skilled workers from across the nation. This technological growth represented the latest evolution of an economy that had continuously adapted to changing opportunities and challenges. Biotechnology and life sciences industries achieved new levels of sophistication as research institutions and private companies collaborated on breakthrough innovations. Medical device manufacturing, pharmaceutical development, and genetic research created knowledge-based industries that employed thousands while contributing to human health and scientific advancement. These industries reflected the valley's transformation from resource extraction to knowledge creation. Cultural institutions reached unprecedented levels of excellence and recognition during this period. The Utah Symphony achieved international acclaim, while local theatre companies and dance organizations created programming that attracted national attention. Museums and galleries expanded their collections and facilities while showcasing both regional heritage and contemporary artistic expression. The outdoor recreation economy continued growing as the valley's natural setting became increasingly valuable for both residents and visitors. Ski resorts invested billions in facility upgrades and expansion, while mountain biking, hiking, and climbing attractions drew enthusiasts from around the world. This recreation industry built upon natural assets while creating sustainable employment that honoured environmental stewardship. educational institutions maintained their reputation for excellence while adapting to changing workforce needs and technological opportunities. The University of Utah expanded its research programs and facilities while maintaining strong connections to local industries and community needs. Public schools continued earning recognition for innovation and achievement while preparing students for an increasingly complex and connected world. International connections deepened as global businesses recognized the Valley's advantages for operations and expansion. Trade relationships, cultural exchanges, and investment flows connected Salt Lake City to markets and communities worldwide while maintaining the distinctive character that made the region attractive. The 2002 Olympics had introduced the Valley to the world. Subsequent decades saw those relationships mature into lasting partnerships. Historic preservation efforts gained momentum as rapid development threatened to erase physical connections to the pioneer heritage that defined community identity. Historic districts expanded while new museums and interpretive centers helped residents and visitors understand the remarkable transformation that had occurred over 17 decades. These preservation initiatives honored the past while accommodating continued growth and change. The emergence of new neighborhoods and commercial districts reflected both population growth and evolving lifestyle preferences. Mixed-use developments created walkable communities that reduced automobile dependence while providing convenient access to employment, shopping, and entertainment. These planning approaches honored traditional urbanism while incorporating modern sustainability and livability principles. Financial services continued expanding as regional institutions grew to serve customers throughout the Mountain West and beyond. Investment management, banking, and insurance companies established major operations while supporting business development across multiple industries. This financial sector growth provided stable employment while strengthening the regional economy's foundation. Environmental stewardship became increasingly sophisticated as communities balanced growth pressures with conservation goals. Habitat restoration projects, wildlife corridors, and open space preservation created sustainable development patterns that honored both human needs and natural systems. These environmental programs demonstrated that economic prosperity and ecological health could be mutually supporting objectives. The Valley's reputation for innovation and entrepreneurship attracted venture capital and startup companies seeking supportive environments for business development. Technology incubators, research parks, and networking organizations created ecosystems that nurtured new ideas while maintaining the collaborative spirit that had always characterized the community. Public-private partnerships enabled major infrastructure projects that would have challenged any single organization's resources. Transportation improvements, utility expansions, and recreational facility development required cooperation between government agencies, private companies, and community organizations. These collaborative approaches echoed the collective effort that had built irrigation systems and established communities during the pioneer era. The continuing evolution of downtown Salt Lake City reflected both economic vitality and urban planning excellence. New residential towers, office buildings, and cultural facilities created a modern skyline while preserving historic structures that maintained connections to the community's founding. This balanced development demonstrated sophisticated approaches to urban growth that honored heritage while embracing progress. Suburban communities throughout the valley developed their own distinctive characters while maintaining connections to the broader metropolitan region. Each area offered unique amenities and lifestyle options while participating in the economic and cultural networks that defined modern valley life. This diversity within unity reflected the same principles that had guided territorial development during the 19th century. The valley's emergence as a major centre for conferences and conventions reflected both infrastructure quality and geographic advantages. New meeting facilities, expanded airport capacity, and world-class hospitality services attracted events that brought visitors and economic benefits while showcasing the region's achievements. These developments built upon the tradition of welcoming travelers that had characterized the community since pioneer times. Research and development activities expanded dramatically as universities, government agencies, and private companies established collaborative programs that addressed challenges ranging from water scarcity to renewable energy. These innovation networks created knowledge that benefited communities far beyond the valley, while attracting talented individuals who contributed to continued economic and intellectual development. The integration of smart city technologies improved efficiency and sustainability while maintaining the human scale that had always characterized valley communities. Traffic management systems, energy grids, and public services incorporated digital innovations that enhanced quality of life while preserving the accessibility and community connection that residents valued. As the 2020s progressed, the Salt Lake Valley had clearly established itself as one of America's premier metropolitan regions. The transformation from barren desert to sophisticated urban center represented an achievement that validated every sacrifice made by earlier generations. Yet this success created new responsibilities for stewardship and careful development that were to determine the region's future character. The challenges facing the valley in the third decade of the 21st century required the same vision, determination, and cooperative spirit that had enabled pioneers to create communities in seemingly impossible circumstances. Water conservation, air quality improvement, sustainable growth, and social equity demanded innovative solutions that honored traditional values while embracing technological and social progress. The story of Salt Lake City's development from wilderness to metropolis demonstrated that human communities could indeed transform landscapes and create prosperity through sustained effort and mutual cooperation. Each generation had built upon foundations laid by their predecessors while adapting to new opportunities and constraints, creating a legacy of achievement that inspired confidence in the future. The desert valley that had once seemed hostile to human habitation now supported over 1 million residents who enjoyed quality of life that ranked among the highest in the nation. This transformation had occurred not through miraculous intervention, but through the accumulated efforts of countless individuals who shared common purposes while maintaining respect for diverse perspectives and backgrounds. The same qualities that had enabled 19th century pioneers to create irrigation systems and build communities in the desert continued to drive 21st century innovation and adaptation. Whether addressing climate change, technological disruption, or social challenges, Valley residents drew upon traditions of problem-solving and collaboration that had sustained the community through 17 decades of continuous change. The geometric precision of the original city layout remained visible in satellite images that showed the distinctive grid pattern extending across the valley floor. This enduring structure provided a foundation for modern development while symbolizing the order and purpose that had guided community development since the very beginning. Contemporary visitors who stood where Brigham Young had first gazed across the valley could see evidence of the remarkable transformation in every direction. Where sagebrush and alkali flats had once dominated the landscape, thriving neighborhoods, commercial districts, and recreational areas created a metropolitan region that contributed significantly to national economic and cultural life. The mountains that had sheltered and challenged the first pioneers continued providing both beauty and resources for modern residents. Snowpack in high elevations sustained the water supplies that enabled continued growth, while recreational opportunities in mountain valleys attracted residents and visitors who valued outdoor lifestyle amenities. The Great Salt Lake, that had given the valley its name remained a distinctive feature that influenced weather patterns, provided recreational opportunities, and created unique ecosystems. The lake's fluctuating levels reminded residents of their dependence on natural systems, while inspiring continued innovation in water management and environmental stewardship. Transportation networks that connected the valley to markets and communities worldwide reflected the geographic advantages that had originally attracted settlement. The international airport, interstate highways, and rail facilities created connections that supported economic development while maintaining the strategic position that had made the valley valuable for over a century and a half. The universities, museums, theatres, and other cultural institutions that enriched valley life honoured the commitment to education and intellectual development that had characterised the community since pioneer times. These facilities provided opportunities for learning and cultural expression while attracting talented individuals who contributed to continued innovation and progress. Religious institutions throughout the valley reflected both the founding heritage and the growing diversity that characterized modern metropolitan life. Historic temples and churches stood alongside newer facilities that served diverse faith communities, creating a landscape of spiritual diversity that honored both tradition and contemporary needs. The business districts and industrial areas that provided employment for hundreds of thousands of workers demonstrated the economic diversification that had transformed the valley from agricultural settlement to modern metropolitan centre. Technology companies, manufacturing facilities, and service industries created prosperity while maintaining the work ethic and innovation that had always characterized the community. Residential neighborhoods that housed valley families reflected both architectural heritage and contemporary lifestyle preferences. Historic districts preserved connections to pioneer and early statehood periods, while new developments incorporated modern amenities and sustainability features that address current needs and environmental concerns. The parks, trails, and open spaces that provided recreational opportunities throughout the valley honoured the natural setting while creating amenities that enhanced quality of life for residents of all ages and backgrounds. These recreational facilities built upon the outdoor traditions that had always attracted people to the mountain region. As the valley entered the third decade of the 21st century, its residents could take pride in achievements that exceeded the most optimistic dreams of the pioneers who had first broken ground in the desert. The transformation from barren wasteland to thriving metropolitan region represented one of the most successful community development efforts in human history. Yet this success also created responsibilities for continued stewardship and careful development that would determine the region's future character and sustainability. The challenges of water scarcity, air quality, sustainable growth, and social equity required the same innovative thinking and cooperative effort that had enabled earlier generations to overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. The story of Salt Lake City's remarkable transformation continued to unfold as new chapters were written by residents who inherited both the achievements and the responsibilities created by 17 decades of continuous development and adaptation. And the responsibilities and who inherit created adaptation by 17, both the achievements, decades of continuous developments. The story of Salt Lake City's remarkable transformation continued to unfold as new chapters were written by residents who inherited both the achievements and the responsibilities created by 17 decades of continuous development and adaptation. The valley that had challenged every generation since 1847 with new obstacles and opportunities remained a place where innovation flourished alongside respect for enduring principles. The approaching 175th anniversary of the pioneers' arrival sparked community-wide reflection on the extraordinary journey from desert wilderness to modern metropolis. Historical societies organized exhibitions that traced the evolution of neighborhoods, while documentary filmmakers captured stories of transformation that spanned multiple generations. These commemorative efforts revealed patterns of resilience and adaptation that offered guidance for contemporary challenges. The influence of climate change became increasingly apparent as weather patterns shifted in ways that recalled the environmental extremes that had tested earlier settlers. Extended drought periods stressed water systems that had sustained growth for over a century, while unprecedented heat waves challenged energy grids designed for more moderate conditions. These environmental pressures required innovative responses that honored the conservation principles established by the pioneers while embracing cutting-edge technologies. Smart water management systems emerged that combined traditional conservation practices with advanced monitoring and distribution technologies. Sensors throughout the irrigation network provided real-time data on usage patterns, while automated systems optimized water delivery to reduce waste and maximize efficiency. These technological innovations built upon the communal water management principles that had enabled agricultural success in the desert environment. The development of atmospheric water generation systems offered new sources of supply that complemented traditional mountain snowpack. These facilities extracted moisture directly from desert air, creating renewable water sources that reduced dependence on increasingly variable precipitation patterns. The technology represented the latest evolution of engineering innovation that had characterized valley development since the first irrigation canals were dug. Urban agriculture initiatives gained momentum as communities sought to reduce food miles while creating local employment opportunities. Vertical farms and hydroponic facilities produced fresh vegetables year-round using minimal water and energy, while community gardens strengthened neighborhood connections and food security. These agricultural innovations honored the farming heritage that had sustained early settlement while adapting to contemporary urban conditions. The expansion of renewable energy systems accelerated as falling costs made solar and wind power increasingly attractive alternatives to fossil fuels. Rooftop solar installations proliferated throughout residential neighborhoods, while utility-scale projects in surrounding deserts generated clean electricity for growing populations. Energy storage systems enabled round-the-clock renewable power that reduced dependence on traditional generation sources. Electric vehicle adoption surged as charging infrastructure expanded and battery technology improved. The transition to electric transportation promised significant improvements in air quality while reducing greenhouse gas emissions that contributed to climate change. Public transit systems incorporated electric buses and trains that provided clean mobility options for residents throughout the metropolitan region. The technology sector continued expanding with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and quantum computing companies establishing major operations in the valley. These cutting-edge industries attracted talent from around the world while creating high-paying employment that supported continued economic growth. Research collaborations between universities and private companies generated innovations that influenced global technology development. Biotechnology and pharmaceutical industries achieved new breakthroughs in personalized medicine and therapeutic development. Clinical trials and research facilities throughout the valley contributed to treatments for cancer, genetic disorders, and other conditions that affected millions worldwide. These medical innovations reflected the community's commitment to improving human health and well-being. The aerospace and defense sectors maintained their significant presence as national security priorities emphasized domestic manufacturing and technological leadership. Advanced materials research, satellite technology, and cybersecurity systems developed in valley facilities contributed to both civilian and military applications. These industries provided stable employment while supporting national competitiveness in critical technologies. Financial technology companies revolutionize banking and investment services through blockchain applications, digital currencies, and automated trading systems. These innovations created new forms of economic activity while maintaining the Valley's reputation for ethical business practices and regulatory compliance. The fintech sector attracted international investment while supporting local entrepreneurship and innovation. Cultural institutions achieved new heights of recognition and community engagement as diverse programming reflected the Valley's growing international connections. Symphony orchestras, theatre companies, and dance organizations collaborated with artists from around the world while showcasing local talent and creativity. Museums expanded their collections and educational programs to serve increasingly diverse audiences. The outdoor recreation economy continued evolving as climate change and population growth created both challenges and opportunities. Ski resorts invested in snowmaking technology and diversified summer programming, while mountain biking, hiking, and climbing areas managed increasing visitor numbers through reservation systems and trail improvements. These adaptations maintained recreational access while protecting fragile mountain ecosystems. Tourism marketing emphasized sustainable travel and environmental stewardship as visitor education programs promoted responsible recreation practices. Eco-tourism initiatives highlighted conservation efforts while generating revenue that supported habitat protection and restoration projects. These programs built upon the Valley's tradition of balancing economic development with environmental preservation. Housing development faced increasing challenges as land costs rose, and water availability constraints limited growth in certain areas. Innovative construction techniques and materials reduced environmental impact while creating affordable housing options for essential workers and young families. Modular construction, sustainable materials, and energy-efficient design became standard features in new residential projects. Transportation infrastructure continued evolving as population growth and changing commuting patterns required new approaches to mobility. Autonomous vehicle testing programs prepared for future transportation systems, while bike lane networks and pedestrian improvements encouraged active transportation options. These innovations honored the wide street design of the original city plan while adapting to contemporary mobility needs. Educational institutions embraced technological innovations that enhanced learning opportunities while maintaining their reputation for excellence and innovation. Virtual reality classrooms, artificial intelligence, tutoring systems, and global collaboration platforms connected Valley students with peers worldwide while providing personalized instruction that met individual needs and interests. Workforce development programs address the skills gap created by rapidly evolving technology industries. Community colleges, universities, and private training organizations collaborated to provide education and certification programs that prepared workers for emerging career opportunities. These initiatives ensured that Valley residents could participate in the high-technology economy that increasingly defined regional prosperity. International trade relationships expanded as Valley companies sought global markets for their products and services. Trade missions, cultural exchanges, and sister city partnerships created networks that supported business development while promoting mutual understanding between communities. These international connections honored the Valley's tradition of welcoming diverse peoples while creating economic opportunities. Immigration continued enriching the Valley's cultural landscape as refugees, skilled workers, and international students brought new perspectives and talents to established communities. Integration programs helped newcomers adapt to local conditions while preserving cultural traditions that added vibrancy to neighborhood life. These efforts reflected the same spirit of inclusion that had characterized earlier waves of immigration. Environmental restoration projects achieved remarkable success in healing landscapes damaged by earlier industrial activities. Wetland reconstruction, habitat corridors, and species reintroduction programs restored ecological functions while providing recreational and educational opportunities. These conservation efforts demonstrated that economic development and environmental stewardship could support rather than conflict with each other. The emergence of circular economy principles influenced business development as companies sought to minimize waste and maximize resource efficiency. Recycling programs, remanufacturing initiatives, and sustainable design practices created new economic opportunities while reducing environmental impact. These approaches honored the resource conservation ethic that had always characterized valley communities. Public-private partnerships enabled infrastructure investments that supported continued growth while maintaining fiscal responsibility. Transportation improvements, utility expansions, and recreational facility development required collaboration between government agencies, private companies, and community organizations. These cooperative approaches echoed the collective effort that had characterized valley development since pioneer times. Social equity initiatives addressed disparities in housing, education, and economic opportunity that had emerged during periods of rapid growth. Affordable housing programs, scholarship funds, and small business development efforts sought to ensure that all valley residents could participate in regional prosperity. These programs reflected the communal values that had guided community development since the earliest settlements. The valley's reputation for innovation and quality of life attracted major corporations seeking locations for regional headquarters and research facilities. These companies brought high-paying employment while contributing to tax revenues that supported public services and infrastructure improvements. Corporate relocations validated decades of investment in education, transportation, and community amenities. Arts and cultural programming flourished as increased prosperity supported creative expression and cultural exchange. Public art installations, community festivals, and cultural districts created gathering places that strengthened neighborhood connections while celebrating diverse traditions. These cultural amenities enhanced quality of life while attracting visitors and new residents. Healthcare systems achieved new levels of excellence and accessibility as medical technology and treatment options continued advancing. Telemedicine programs provided specialized care to rural communities, while research hospitals contributed to medical knowledge that benefited patients worldwide. These healthcare innovations built upon the tradition of community care that had sustained earlier generations through illness and hardship. The integration of smart city technologies improved government efficiency and citizen services while maintaining transparency and accountability. Digital platforms enabled online service delivery and community engagement, while data analytics supported evidence-based policymaking and resource allocation. These technological tools enhanced democratic participation while preserving the accessibility that had always characterized valley governance. Crime rates remained among the lowest in the nation as community policing programs and social services addressed underlying causes of criminal behavior. Neighborhood watch programs, youth mentorship initiatives, and substance abuse treatment created prevention-focused approaches that maintained public safety while supporting individual rehabilitation and community healing. The Valley's emergence as a major centre for conferences and events reflected both infrastructure quality and organisational expertise. Convention facilities, hotel capacity, and transportation systems supported gatherings that brought visitors and economic benefits while showcasing regional achievements. These events honoured the tradition of hospitality that had characterised the community since pioneer times. Emergency preparedness systems incorporated lessons learned from natural disasters, pandemics, and other crises that had tested community resilience throughout history. Early warning networks, mutual aid organizations, and resource stockpiling created response capabilities that could address multiple types of emergencies. These preparations honored the self-reliance traditions that had enabled survival during earlier challenging periods. The continuing transformation of downtown Salt Lake City created a vibrant urban core that balanced historic preservation with contemporary development needs. Mixed-use projects provided housing, employment, and entertainment options within walking distance, while public transportation connected the downtown area to communities throughout the valley. This urban renaissance honored the geometric precision of the original city plan while creating modern amenities. Suburban communities throughout the valley developed distinctive identities while maintaining connections to the broader metropolitan region. Each area offered unique lifestyle options and amenities while participating in economic and cultural networks that defined modern valley life. This diversity within unity reflected principles that had guided territorial development during the 19th century. The preservation of agricultural land became increasingly important as development pressure threatened the farming heritage that had sustained early settlement. Agricultural preservation programs, farmers markets, and agritourism initiatives maintained connections to the land while providing economic opportunities for rural communities. These efforts honored the farming traditions that had transformed desert into productive landscape. Water conservation achieved remarkable success as technological innovations and behavioral changes reduced per capita consumption despite population growth. Drought-resistant landscaping, efficient irrigation systems, and recycling programs demonstrated that prosperity and sustainability could be mutually supporting objectives. These achievements validated the conservation principles that had guided water management since pioneer times. The valley's transformation from isolated frontier settlement to globally connected metropolitan region represented one of the most remarkable community development achievements in world history. Each generation had faced unique challenges while building upon foundations established by their predecessors, creating a legacy of innovation and adaptation that inspired confidence in the future. The approaching bicentennial of the pioneers' arrival would provide opportunities to reflect on lessons learned and principles that could guide future development. The same vision, determination, and cooperative spirit that had enabled communities to flourish in seemingly impossible circumstances continued inspiring residents who faced contemporary challenges with confidence and creativity. The desert that had once seemed hostile to human habitation now supported communities that ranked among the most livable and prosperous in the world. This transformation validated the faith of those who had envisioned Zion in the wilderness, while demonstrating that human communities could indeed reshape landscapes through sustained effort and mutual cooperation. The story continued unfolding as new generations added their own chapters to the remarkable narrative of transformation and achievement. Add transformation and achievement their own chapters to the remarkable narrative unfolding as new generations. From the vantage point where Brigham Young first declared, "This is the right place," we can now see the fulfillment of an impossible dream. The barren valley that once challenged even the hardiest mountain men has become a thriving metropolis that stands as testament to human determination and collective vision. The transformation we've witnessed spans nearly 2 centuries of continuous adaptation and innovation. From hand-dug irrigation canals to smart water management systems, from covered wagons to international airports, from sagebrush desert to gleaming skyscrapers, each generation built upon the foundations laid by those who came before, while meeting the unique challenges of their time. The pioneers who first broke ground in 1847 could never have imagined the sophisticated metropolitan region that would emerge from their desperate survival efforts. Yet the same qualities that enabled them to create communities in seemingly impossible circumstances continue to drive innovation and progress today. Vision, determination, and cooperative spirit remain the essential ingredients for overcoming obstacles and achieving remarkable transformations. Salt Lake City's story reminds us that no landscape is permanently hostile to human aspiration. No challenge insurmountable when communities unite around common purposes. The desert truly did become Zion, not through miraculous intervention, but through the accumulated efforts of countless individuals who refused to accept that their dreams were impossible. As we look toward the future, the lessons of this remarkable transformation offer hope and guidance for communities everywhere, facing their own seemingly impossible challenges. The story continues to unfold, and its next chapters remain to be written.